Good afternoon, and welcome to Strategies for Maximizing Your Investment in a Cloud-Based Data Warehouse, a Health System CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by 314E. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments anytime in the Q&A box, and we'll take those later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today. First, we're going to have our main panel, about 35-40 minutes, featuring Chris Hutchins, VP, Chief Data and Analytics Officer with Northwell Health, Beth Lindsay-Wood, VP and CIO at City of Hope, and Dr. Raman, Chief Product and Analytics Officer with 314E. And then we'll have our Q&A. So let's jump right in. Chris, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Certainly. First of all, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be here with my esteemed colleagues. I'm Vice President and Chief Data Analytics Officer, as you indicated, at Northwell Health. We're based in New York, spread across Long Island in the Metro New York City area. We're 23 hospitals, roughly 900 outpatient facilities. I think the latest tally I heard was like 83,000 employees of the health system. We're the largest private employer in the state of New York. We have medical school, nursing school, very robust research division, and a pretty healthy ventures arm as well. We're really doing a lot of work in the innovation space, heavily focused at the moment on some AI and opportunities for commercialization.
Very good, Chris. Thank you. Beth?
Yes, I'm Beth Lindsay-Wood. I'm the Senior VP and CIO at City of Hope. City of Hope is based out of Southern California. The headquarters are in a small town called Duarte, right outside of LA. The organization just recently acquired Cancer Treatment Centers of America, which is in other states in the United States. So we are now a national and the only, I believe, national cancer treatment center in the nation. So we're very proud of that, trying to deliver high-end cancer care across the states. So we are, again, started in LA, a lot of growth and expansion, a lot of very high-end cancer treatments, heavy research as well. And so we are in the throes of the integration of an acquisition. So, but I'm very excited to be working and part of the CTCA organization as well that are coming in.
Very good, Beth. Thank you. Siv?
Hello, everyone. I'm Raman. I'm the Chief Product and Analytics Officer of 314E. We're a health information technology company that has been in existence for about 17 years. We've done health IT services work on the provider side, EMR implementations, especially Epic, cloud migrations, data and analytics. And we've made the foray into products about 4 years back. And we have products in the domain of practice management and reputation management systems, data archival systems, as well as health data platforms and digital adoption and learning management systems, all focused on the healthcare space.
Very good, Siv. Thank you. All right, let's jump right into it. Chris, we'll start with you. Please talk about some of the applications and workloads you've migrated to the cloud. Why did you select the applications in that order? What was your motivation and what did you hope to gain?
Great question. The first things that we were thinking about were our sort of our enterprise clinical data sets. So part of the motivation was that we had a timetable where we had to get off some technologies that we were currently using that were on-prem. So the technology was being sunset. So I knew I had to have a different option available by the time we had the sunset. And so at that point, the organization had already started to do some exploration, and we're really challenging us to start thinking about putting things into a cloud environment to hopefully over time reduce our data center costs. There's some interesting thoughts around that I'm sure that we'll touch on. The cost aspect of it is frequently misunderstood and misrepresented. So that also was part of the thought process we used to determine which things we're going to start with. So when you're thinking about data and analytics, if you're having people consume them from a visualization standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, and it's relatively straightforward to do that. When they're having to do a lot more interaction, and they're like wanting to download things. I don't know about the rest of you, but I know the minute we started putting out applications or dashboards, people started asking, well, can we print it? Like, what? But the interaction was really the piece that we have to gauge in terms of which things we put there, which things we keep on an on-prem solution. Just so it was relatively simple because it was the data sets that we had the most familiarity with, the most knowledge of. And certainly we had a good sense of which components of the data were really critical, which ones weren't. So we don't want to put everything into the analytics environment, just the things that are really going to be supporting analytics.
Was the printing, is that a security concern about the printing?
No, it's just the whole idea of doing visualizations is hopefully you can get to the top, I don't know, 30 things that you're curious about and understanding how to adjust something. Historically, you had to get an analyst to go do this work only to find out that the answers to your question weren't apparent. You had to go deeper, right? And so instead of waiting in a queue for someone to do that work, we're enabling them to see the things that they're most concerned about at their fingertips. Why would you want to print that? Honestly, so it's just a mindset. There's definitely people who still want print copies of things, but we're trying to move away from that, and that's the whole idea of producing, those kind of tools with a visual representation of the data.
Very good, Beth. Your thoughts?
Well, I think for me, we started migrations of things like email. Way back, we did that 10 years ago or something. But just looking at when certain technologies were available in the cloud, or certain applications was part of it. And that's evolved for us in terms of, our researchers do a lot of file sharing as they're in grants. And so, being able to do some of that in the cloud was important. But just generally for us to store our documents in the cloud was our starting point. And then looking at any platforms that were cloud-based, native cloud, the preference would be to do that versus on-prem. I think for us, our more recent types of things are our data warehouse that is used by research and clinical, with a lot of genomic data, a lot of data coming from other sources on genomics. So being able to have that in the cloud, looking at the compute capabilities and tools there, similar to what Chris was saying around visualization, all of those kinds of things, being able to do all of that, it was critical. So again, I think that was a need in the organization to simplify and put some relief on the data center side as well. But now we are at a point where we're doing static storage, backups, all those kinds of things in the cloud. We're sort of a hybrid cloud model on purpose. But I think that we're now looking at the big things like the next one might be our electronic medical record. We already have our ERP, cloud-based, or our CRM. So a lot of our big platforms are already cloud-based, but EMR, the electronic medical record, is probably the last bastion on that. So that would be another one that we would do. And the motivation for us, candidly, is living in both worlds, on-prem and cloud, is the most cumbersome option in terms of staffing. And I think that the idea would be, we would like to just not have data, on-prem data centers risk to deal with, where it's located. keeping up with end of life, all the refresh. So those things are a motivator for us, particularly right now, because we are looking at trying to take one of our data centers out of the equation here. So I think that was why we still have, a ways to go, again, with the EMR being a big one. And then as we are replacing products, looking at, in the RFP process, even making sure that they're cloud-based.
Beth, so you're saying that hybrid world, living in that hybrid world is not the best.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
resource intensive. And I've heard other people say either some workloads they think are a long way off, or they think they'll be on-prem forever. It might have been some of these genomic type intensive things, could be some imaging stuff. It was sort of the very heavy kind of workloads. But do you have a different vision where eventually you're going to have that all out there in the cloud?
I think eventually, I do think for us, imaging PACS and digital pathology and some of those components are probably the last ones to move completely, although we are looking at that right now. I do have concerns just about, storage, a lot of storage, big images that we have on our side. So, and research PACS images too. So, but that is an intent, is to consider, moving in that direction, and certainly, reducing our footprint on-prem dramatically. But so the hybrid ideas, of course, some is driven by the vendor that software vendor that you work with in some cases. And for us, we have multi-cloud on purpose because we don't want to be reliant on one. So we can rehost under different clouds, over time, but that's kind of the thought. And the expensive part is really just about the kinds of staffing. You have cloud architects, you have a lot of different kinds of skills that you have to bring to bear when you're sort of living pretty heavily in both worlds.
Great. And I want to follow up on that in a little bit, but Siv, I want to bring you in. What are your thoughts to what you're hearing, your comments?
I think, I agree with most of the things that my panelists, co-panelists have talked about. We, for example, have done application migrations to the cloud for some of our clients. We did it for a large Midwest not-for-profit health system, migrated their legacy Microsoft SQL Server parallel data warehouse, from on-prem to the cloud, with multiple systems like Epic, SAP, and Press-Ganey patient experience data in it. And then we did for a large academic medical center on the East Coast. We integrated data from more than 60 different systems into a Databricks-based modern lakehouse. So I think the selection of applications and what order you go there, it mostly for us depends on customer requirements, but it's also related to, because you can't migrate everything all at once. You have to make sure that the existing business processes that are running and which are mission critical and they're the revenue generating or the things in the company that need to stay on. So you do not want to address those first. You want to address the ones that are more peripheral, and then move on as you gain more experience to the critical systems, and then migrate them as well.
Okay.
And then, in terms of legacy infrastructure, most companies, they're motivated by cost as well as better management. And that's what we see in most of our clients as well.
I think the supply chain issues are another driver these days with equipment.
Right.
Supply chain. Beth, you mentioned multi-cloud and not wanting to be sort of beholden or owned, as it were, by any one vendor. And then I think you briefly mentioned that you need a talent mix in-house that can handle each one of those. If you're not just going to do one, it gives you a little more freedom, but it also requires more in-house talent. I would imagine that you need talent that knows how to manage each specific environment. Is that correct?
Well, I think that, if you have someone that is their experience is cloud,
Yeah.
from an architecture perspective, yes, there's nuances, I think, with every service provider, but in general, knowing and understanding that environment is different than for folks that are working with on-prem solutions, right? And storage architects and some of the things that you have to have. But I think that from my perspective, we're seeing that we're not really reducing the on-prem types of skills, because we still have to maintain that. But we're also adding to that new skills, whether it's security, architect, just a lot of operations types that, particularly in the infrastructure area, that, but even some, cyber, it feels a little bit different as well. So, so some of those are being additive, it's not that we're replacing, we're adding, because the environments are, different.
So Chris, that's interesting, right? We want to reduce, but we want to go to cloud, maybe get rid of on-prem, but at least for a while we have to live in both worlds. We want to have a multi-cloud environment to give us freedom, but we still need the on-prem talent. We need the general cloud talent, and perhaps at least certifications in different specific cloud environments. So it sounds like during this transition period, instead of being able to reduce cost and expenses, it goes up, at least for a short period of time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's consistent with my own experience as well. And we've been, moving things carefully for all the reasons that everyone would expect. Our finance team is certainly very, very close to the conversations and the planning, because they need to understand what the real impact is. One of the things that I've challenged on a couple of occasions, there's discussion around some applications that had really high, IO, input output, and those were ones that I cautioned. Let's dip our toe with something that's maybe seeing a little less transactional activity, so we can really understand what that cost looks like. Because just reducing our footprint in the data center doesn't necessarily mean the cost is coming down. So we need to make sure that we're monitoring it. But the challenge with that is not only kind of testing the waters, but then the other piece of it's readiness. There's not every application is a candidate right now for us. There's a good chunk of them that getting it ready for cloud is on their roadmap, but the vendors aren't anywhere near the point where they're ready for us to do any kind of migration. So it's not as easy as one would hope, but there's definitely an interim model where probably it's a little bit more expensive.
And so when you're advising clients and talking to potential clients who are looking at this kind of migration, how would you describe to them, one of their goals is cost reduction, at least on-prem. How would you paint the picture for them about the resources they're going to need to allocate and the road that they're going to be going down? It may not be, at least initially, as rosy in terms of dropping costs right away. Do you try and sort of prepare them for that?
Yeah, so I think, it's a big difference between OpEx versus CapEx. If you're going with some sort of a public cloud with a pay-as-you-go model, that becomes more of operational expenditure. But if you're, wanting to have total control and actually set up a private cloud, that is very similar in the expenditure domain to your old on-prem, where you had a lot of CapEx. So I think that's one of the things. The other thing that I have seen with a lot of clients is that the first few bills or invoices that come in always surprise the client. Either they're too high or they're too low, depending on the usage of the cloud. And that's something that's very different from having an on-prem system where compute and things like that are pretty much free, right? You don't get, it's not a pay as you go or use or pay for what you use for. So I think we do prepare our clients for those things.
Chris, one of the things that we've heard speaking to individuals about this type of issue is that you need to really have good governance around the environment so that it's like the I would use a sandbox example. Everybody wants to play. They say this is great. You've given us these toys, we can play. But if there's no governance around spinning things up, when you get that bill, you find out how much they've been playing, and it doesn't work out well for you. So, what are your thoughts around that?
That's a great point. And we've fortunately, when we launched things here, when we first started, we were only using one of the cloud solutions, and there's a central area where those things are routed. So for example, we have, I think now, 4 different groups who've come to us that wanted their own cloud environment to work in. And so, we work with them to set that up, but they're accountable from a funding standpoint. They have to provide their cost center, and that's where the charge is going to show up. But we're monitoring those things, on their behalf as well. But again, it comes through a process. It's not anyone can ask for it and it's free. We're making the divisions that are looking to do that work. We're making them accountable for the expense and making sure they understand what they're getting into.
Beth, is this challenging, or you just got to put the right structure around it, and this shouldn't be a big deal as long as you understand the right way to do it?
Well, because we have research, I'm sure Chris experiences this too, with really high-end computing needs. We can charge back for their time, right? For what they're using. You can do it on-prem for cycle time, but you have to build in the equipment and all the different things that you have to take into account. It's complicated to do it. So it is interesting for people to see how they're using, even for data storage, even file storage. It's a surprise when people see the kind of growth, that people and on the other side, from my perspective, as we look at this, you do have to have good controls in place. You should be monitoring what's going on. But on the other hand, when we have in the data center, when we had our high performance computing in the data center, you're buying a lot of machine that you're not using 24/7. You have to. You're building for growth in the future, so you're paying for it, now. But you're not going to use it all. So if it's a 5-year life on something, you're buying something that you'll need at the end, right? And so there's waste there, and so that's important, I think, when you're looking at things like, performance, the high performing types of work that goes on. It doesn't go on always 24/7.
So Siv, that's an upside for the way the cloud charges,
Yes.
because you may be using a lot, but at least you're paying for what you use, as opposed to what Beth is talking about in the old model. You had to sort of pay ahead excess capacity you might not need, may never need, or might need far down the road. But Siv, do you have any thoughts on this idea of making sure the usage doesn't get out of control, and that there's governance around it, and that the things that are being spun up are the things the organization should be spinning up?
Yeah, so one of the things that our clients love about a cloud-based warehouse or analytics environment is the fact that they can scale when needed and then scale back down. Now, what we do always in this case is we do set up monitors that are able to figure out, how much of a cost is being run up as some of these massive compute operations are being deployed. So it should not be something that you track only, every 15 days or every week, but on a daily basis, you should be getting some idea of, what are the big compute operations and what are the costs that are being run up. So we make sure we do that.
Yeah, Beth, I think you would want those users and those researchers to have some sort of fairly real-time feedback on the bill as it's going up. So they say,
Right.
well, I didn't know this was going to happen. And right. I mean, you almost need that real-time feedback. What are your
Well, you
thoughts
can
around that?
get it, because you
Uh,
can see what's actually happening depending
mhm.
on how you set up the cloud. But in that case, for us, at a minimum, IT needs to be prepared for a show back so that they can see what they're doing and figure out, in some cases, grants can help pay for things like that. But in a lot of cases, it's coming right out of, right out of the company's coffers, obviously. So I think that in any case, we have a better opportunity to show where the cost is being allocated, what is really happening out there and where are we seeing that growth, on the cloud side.
All right, very good. Next question. This is sort of the big one. Chris, let's go with you first. Some organizations have not realized the hoped for benefits after cloud migration. What are some reasons this could happen and how could they be avoided? And then or sort of where are you on your journey in terms of realizing those? That's the theory here, is that you can miss some things in the way you're structuring it or executing it that will leave you not having realized the hope for benefits. And we want to talk about that. So Chris, your thoughts.
I think a lot of it comes down to having the right expectations going into it. Sometimes the goals are a little bit uninformed, and I think that's where there can be some unintended consequences. But I think probably one of the biggest ones that had to be really socialized and vetted with the executive team. I think Sid, you already referred to this, but there is a pivot from a capital spend versus to an operating spend. And if you're an organization that's got an aggressive growth strategy like we do, there's a lot of reasons you have to, keep that balance properly. You don't want to, adversely impact your operating expense and have it go sky high at a point in time when you're planning for some significant growth in the organization, whether it's acquisition or investments you want to make. So I think that's one of the things that if you're early in your journey, definitely make sure that you're spending some time with the finance folks. Find the one that's most interested in the topics so that you can have a good partner to really explore it. But again, I think that moving too quickly is probably another significant risk to not achieving what you're expecting to achieve. I think you got to have a little bit of experience under your belt before you really hit the gas pedal and move as fast as you want to. Because the idea of shutting down data centers, I mean, of course, everyone wants to save that money, but the realities are that you're going to learn along the way, like you do, even in doing typical development activities. For if you're doing software development or just data and analytics, there's going to be some surprises, and you really have to walk before you run. I guess it seems cliche, but I think there's truth there.
Very good, Beth.
So I would just to continue that line of discussion, the move to OpEx is pretty dramatic, and in many cases, because it directly affects EBITDA, that is not always well received. And being able to, people do a lot of shopping in the organization, and then at the end of the year, when the bill comes due, people get a little bit surprised. So keeping the organization up to speed on exactly what's happening and what it's going to mean is important. I mean, we probably have 700% or more increase in our SaaS line item, but we haven't reduced our spend in maintenance yet because we still have a lot of the data center stuff in there, right? So it's really incremental cost to some degree that we're dealing with. And the other thing is, once it's in the cloud, depending on, from us, a financial treatment of that asset, or it is not an asset. So if you upgrade it or have a big project around it, you can't capitalize that work. So it means that for us, we're very capital intensive on our projects. But now, based on guidelines, finance guidelines, that even doing big upgrades, doing anything at all with it requires operating expense. It's not just the actual run, it's everything associated with it is now operating. So it is, it means doing less in some cases if budget's an issue, and the organization in our case is growing extremely rapidly with large construction initiatives, again, the acquisitions. There's a lot going on, and so you can't stand still. But what it's doing for us is at least it's increasing our overall spend, beyond natural growth. So I think that the organization, leadership, particularly finance, really has to understand what this means ahead of time, not after the fact. Explaining it later isn't helpful. It's preparing them for what's coming.
That's great. Great stuff. We both talked about working closely with finance, I would imagine the CFO. But Beth, you talk about that 700% increase and that the other numbers haven't come down. That just makes me think how important it is. You said you got to get ahead of it, but you have to tell a story, right? I mean, you have to craft a vision and you have to craft a story ahead of time. And you have to, like you said, you have to explain these things. These can't be a surprise. You have to say this ahead of time so that when it happens, you could say, yeah, I explained that this was how it was going to go. That sounds like a key here, Beth.
Well, CIOs are in the sales business. We have to do that. And we can't just do it once. You have to do it all year long. You have to continue. They have other jobs. This isn't where their minds are at the senior executive level in the organization. So keeping up, finding opportunities to explain again and again without being dull, but to make sure that they know throughout the year, oh, we're getting ready to do this. This will mean, or just a reminder, we will see an uptick in our OpEx because of, the fact that we added another huge organization. And there's a lot of growth of users and FTE headcount, licensing, all that kind of good stuff. So, it's just letting people know all the time about what's happening with IT, and also having in your back pocket a little bit about benchmarks with other similar organizations, or just what's happening in the industry around cloud migration, and what, it may mean that percent of the IT organization is now 7% or 5% of total revenue or expense because of where we're trying to head overall. So this is one piece.
Siv, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would identify, based on our experience with clients, three major issues about relating to why organizations may not have realized their hoped for benefits, from cloud migration. Number one, in my opinion, is the skill set, right? So when an organization that is transitioning to the cloud for, let's say, a data warehouse, the people who have been managing the on-prem warehouse may not have the skill set to migrate efficiently to a cloud-based application. So that's one of the things that is overlooked. Everybody thinks you can just train people. In most cases you can, but then you have to plan for that. The second is what my co-panelists already talked about. Many customers don't anticipate the variances in cost for cloud services. I had an example of a data science team that ran some process for a client that lasted 2 or 3 days, and that huge server doing some predictive model training ran up $2,000 in 3 days.
Yep.
And then the third one is issues around cloud security and performance. Theoretically, it should be better than on-prem because you can secure most of these popular cloud providers much better than you can do a data server. But again, it requires the right resources who are trained in cloud security and then also in performance.
Great.
Siv, what's the main reason that customers bring you in your organization in? What's the number one thing they need help with, sort of more specifically? that if they try and do it on their own, they might have some trouble?
As I said, that's the first one among the three reasons I listed, the skill set, right? Uh, it's tempting to try to do things yourself, but then mature organizations realize that it's better to get a vendor or a consultant to do that initial implementation in a sort of turnkey way, and then hand it over to the existing technology teams to maintain and run. That's the main reason we are sought after by our clients, that we have expertise doing this sort of migration for years on end for tens or scores of clients. And so, it's a risk-free way to migrate to something better without any negative business impact.
And do you train up the in-house talent so that they're ready to then take on those roles, or is it just that you do the work and they have more time to go out and get training on their own?
We have done some training for particular clients. Most of the time, the clients deal with training of their staff on their own. But we have done some training for specific clients who asked for it because they said, we would like our resources to be working with your resources and then learn on the job.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Chris, let's start with you on this. Who are the key executives IT leaders need to work with during cloud migration and optimization? Obviously, we hit on finance pretty hard, so I think we got that one. But who are some of the other folks that you need to work with to get this done?
Well, I would say that there's a 1A and a 1B. I think finance would be, you can pick which slot they're in. The other one is the CISO, hands down from my perspective. The only reason I can sleep at night is because I know that the CISO and her team, they're the ones staying up every night. And I'm sure, Beth, you can probably attest to the number of insane number of attempts that are happening on a daily basis to breach our systems. So, I'd say that's probably one of the key ones to get on board right away and make sure that they're involved in the vetting processes. Our legal team and procurement, I mean, they go through a great amount of rigor when it comes to any kind of contracting that we do. But for me, the CISO is probably the most critical one among the others. But I think when you're dealing with the large research division, you definitely want to have a really strong leader in that space as well, that can really understand and grasp what we're talking about. Because one of the challenges I always get is research doesn't have a lot of funding, and they're always telling me that, so they don't want to pay a lot of money for the support that they need to do their work. But that really necessitates a really tight relationship there, so that you can work through things together, because you do have to figure out how to help them advance. But someone's got to have a really good understanding of what it really means from a cost perspective to make the kind of transitions that they're needing to make.
Excellent, Chris. Thank you. Beth?
No, I absolutely agree with what Chris said. I think it's all of those people. Data governance probably is another group or discipline that is important in terms of knowing where the data is. And obviously in healthcare, we're always worried about HIPAA data. So I think it's involving them in understanding where these things sit, knowing where they sit when you are working with cloud vendors too, is important. But by far, cyber is us kind of a thing, but still that's a key piece of this. We involve our enterprise architecture group pretty heavily, but again, that's somewhat internal. So compliance, legal, finance, all critical. Who really doesn't care is most of our customers. They don't care as long as they can do their work and use the system. I think that they do. Research is a different animal, and it is very different model. So for them, I think that was a great point, Chris, that they are pivotal in terms of engaging them on the kinds of things unique kinds of things that they do that other areas of the organization do not.
Very interesting with that research element. Siv, your thoughts?
I think, the chief financial officer for sure, the chief information security officer. I would say the chief legal people, the risk management people need to get involved. And sometimes it's not necessarily executives, but you also need to bring on board people at a slightly lower level, application development managers and cloud security engineers and program managers, because they're the ones who are making it happen.
Excellent. All right, we're going to do my favorite section here, Ask a Co-Panelist, where we find out what the panelists want to learn from each other. So, Siv, I'm going to let you go first. Do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Right. So what would you say has been your best and your worst cloud migration, if you've done more than one?
Chris, you want to jump in?
I think, for the organization, I think some of the early successes have been in kind of in the app development space, where it's new capabilities that we're developing, and it's not a high transaction volume out of the gate. That was one of the early wins that we had, and it gave us a good opportunity to really assess, what is this really going to look like? What's the impact from a processing standpoint, and what's the cash impact after the first couple of months, seeing what the bills look like. I think, we've been going pretty cautiously, over the last 3 or 4 years anyway. I think we probably slowed down because of the pandemic. I wouldn't be surprised if others in the healthcare sector did as well. But we've been fortunate. Thankfully, we haven't flipped a switch to move a whole bunch of things all at once and had it bite us. So I'm grateful for that.
Very good, Beth.
Yeah, I would have to say, I think for us, the more challenging is yet to come, particularly when we think about imaging and stuff like that. But I'm curious about, how, as we go through this, when we get into some of these deeper things, how it goes. So far, so good. I think, the easiest things are sort of static storage, that nobody really uses. It gets it out of your data center. It's great to have it up there, but, find a low cost, but good service to store it. But those are sort of easy, email, the whole migration for all of the email suite, I'll say Microsoft in this case, but is not as easy for customers, because there is a little bit of uniqueness there. So that might have been, actually, believe it or not, one of our I've done it twice, so each time it's been a little bit of a different way of working for the people that use the applications.
Beth, I would imagine, you don't want to get overconfident, right? Because we're starting out with very sort of more simple projects, because that makes sense. But it sounds like there's such a drastic difference between those simple projects and the big heavy ones that we don't want to get overconfident.
Yeah, I mean, DevOps is a great example, because although it's very important, it's not as central to the work that everyone, where everybody's connecting every day,
Right.
So it does, those things are a little easier to dip your toe in. But we're getting to the point now where it's getting to be pretty big platforms that we're talking about, and some are already there with vendors, that supply it. So that's different, but.
Right. Very good. All right, Chris, do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Actually, yes. So I know images have been mentioned, but I would love to know, what kind of experience either of you might be having, or that you can speak to, because we're in the process of trying to figure out what's the right solution for us to start moving like DICOM images. And I think, Beth, you mentioned digital path. That's something that's we're looking at the moment as well. I would love to know what you can share in terms of what we should anticipate from a cost perspective as we pivot from on-prem.
Beth, you want to go first?
I'll try that, but we're still in the throat. We just were getting ready to pull the trigger on storage on packs, particularly in the cloud. And we're looking at it right now. We're trying to figure out how to get there. I think when we think about research and some of how they handle imaging, that's probably an easier foray in, because you don't have the physicians trying to read these images, right, and pull in images for day-to-day working with patients, and they have to have this right now. So I think it's easier to do some of the imaging where it isn't, where it isn't that patient intensive for us. So I don't know. We are right now working on whether or not we're going to move it into the cloud this year, or whether we're going to hold off for a little bit. So I'll be happy to tell you when I get there. But I think the storage, of images for something like research seems to be, that seems like something that would be a little less pressure for me.
Siv?
I can't say that we've migrated a PACS or a DICOM like system, a RISPAC system with images on over to the cloud, but we have done archives on the cloud which include images. That has been pretty well received. It's being able to manage costs, and it gives you a live archive, not a dead one on tape or something like that, that the physicians and others at provider system can access for patients whom they're looking at today in their EMRs.
I agree with you, Steph. I think for us, we do that for documents, scanned documents, things like that. It's just that interaction, right, that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But yeah, that's a great use case for it.
Very good. All right, Beth, do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Well, this is just a curiosity more than anything, but edge computing is the new thing, right? It'll eat cloud computing. The lunch for cloud computing is the word. What if anything are you doing along those lines? Particularly because we have IoT, patients at home, all kinds of things happening. Just curious about whether either one of you are moving in that space as well.
Chris, you want to jump in?
I know that there's definitely a couple of areas of focus within parts of the IT organization here, but we're walking softly because we are hopefully very, very close to agreeing on putting some standard systems in here. Growth by acquisition sometimes can be painful, and I think we're a good use case for what that pain can look like. We have literally every EHR under the sun, with the exception of Epic, in our health system right now still. And as we've grown by acquisition, it seems as though the shopping list only contains those organizations that have systems that we haven't seen yet. I think that's primarily to make my team lose their marbles. But that's definitely a challenge. So we're moving very slowly because we have to pivot. We've got to make a change and get onto common platforms, and you can probably imagine where that's going to lead us.
Yeah.
Siv?
I actually haven't seen much edge computing in the healthcare world. If I'm wrong and I don't know, but it looks like it's more, telecommunications, finance, many other industries are adopting edge computing at a faster pace. Healthcare is more of a centralized model even now. So at least from the clients that I've been interacting with, we don't hear anything about edge computing.
All right, not too much there. Shockingly, healthcare is not on the cutting edge, right? We're all shocked with that.
Horrified and shocked.
Yeah. All right, we just have a few minutes left, so I just want to get some final thoughts. Let me frame this up by saying your best piece of advice based on your experience so far, where you've had success and in the areas we've discussed today. Your best piece of advice for someone in your position at a comparable sized organization. What would that be? Chris, let's start with you.
if you have the mindset that you've got a Superman cape on, take the cape off. You need people, you need relationships to be successful. And for the reasons that I think we've covered, I think we've even identified some of those key individuals within an organization that you really need to make sure that you're communicating pretty consistently with regard to what the objectives and the goals are. And honestly, you need their input and their advice in terms of how to navigate within the organization, as well as you're tasked with making this kind of a transition.
Very good, Beth.
I would say that, make sure that your approach, your plan, your migration plan is well understood, and that you're not doing it to do it. You're doing it with an outcome in mind, and be clear on that, because cloud for cloud's sake is not the right answer. And people often will do that, because in IT, sometimes we can. But I think understanding the approach and being able to articulate that along with the financial impact of that plan is critical.
That's a great point. That's a great point. It's got to be tied to the vision of the organization and how it's going to help the organization achieve that vision.
Right.
Very good point. Siv, we're going to give you the final word. Your best piece of advice for folks that are looking to move down this road.
Sure. I think, 4 points come to mind. One would be make sure you have the people trained to do this sort of stuff. You need people who are cloud certified with modern cloud technology skills. Application rationalization is the second one. You don't need to move everything to the cloud all at once. So make sure you're moving the rightly chosen applications first. Identify potential issues well ahead of the migration, because you're not the first company doing this, so you can learn from the mistakes that others have made, and identify potential issues that could crop up, and how you're going to mitigate them. And then lastly, you have to have a really well-defined cloud security strategy.
Yeah, certainly cyber, a huge issue. We talked about correlating with finance. So a lot of great information for the folks attending today. That's about all we had time for today regarding continuing education. You could use the final slide in this deck for your certificate. You will receive an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank our wonderful panel today, Chris Hutchins, Beth Lindsay-Wood, and Dr. Siv Raman. I want to thank 314E for sponsoring and you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.